Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of All For You. This will be Part 8, Days 13 and 14. Day 13. Just before the stroke of midnight, Hisashi received a text from Masaru. Katsuki was born about an hour ago, and doctors are doing checkups now. He and Mitsuki seem to be doing fine, although Mitsuki would very much like to know where you got that tempura. She wants more. Hisashi stared at the phone. Good to hear. I'll ask Nezu. Are pictures incoming? A moment later, 2 pictures came in back to back, one of Mitsuki smiling more gently than he had ever seen, down at a swaddled bundle, and the other of said swaddled bundle, red-faced and screaming. Apparently young Katsuki had inherited both Mitsuki's hair and temperament. He looks healthy. Hisashi closed his phone after replying and stared out the window, unsure of how he felt. Day 14. 28 weeks. Hisashi hadn't heard much from the Bakugo since Mitsuki went into labor and they were whisked off to labor and delivery. He could not deny the anxious stone sitting in his gut. He knew Masaru had last said Katsuki and Mitsuki were doing fine, but the doctors had said that to Inko too, right up until everything went very wrong very quickly. It was unnerving to have such little news. He couldn't help but feel that if something were to go wrong, it would have meant he failed Inko. Beyond their importance to his contingencies for Izuku, Mitsuki had been Inko's best friend, and Masaru a close friend as well. Now that Inko was gone, all he had left of her was Izuku and the Bakugos. He needed to keep them safe. However, he refrained from pestering them. Hopefully they were just enjoying their new baby, and contacting Hisashi had simply fallen from priority. In the meantime, Hisashi distracted himself by watching Izuku and entertaining him as much as he was able. Hisashi stared into the incubator, watching Izuku suckle on a pacifier. He was big enough to start using it now. Once he had started showing signs of suckling, he was given one. In an effort to start his switch from IV nutrition to milk, the pacifier was dipped in milk from the donor bank. Izuku seemed to like the taste of it, though he wasn't very good at using it yet. His suckle was weak and the pacifier kept falling out of his mouth, but it was still impressive progress. He was growing up so quickly. His eyelashes and eyebrows were finally grown in. He was becoming more responsive and vocal about his likes and dislikes, and he had even put on some weight. Granted, he was still behind most infants his age, but still, he was so big now. He was almost a kilogram. He was still on ventilation, still recovering from surgery that had left a patch of gauze on his chest and earned him more medical equipment. The surgery had been less than 5 days ago, but felt like an eternity. Every day in this ward felt like an eternity. Hisashi smiled at his son, a warm pride filling his chest, until it felt full to bursting. Izuku was doing so much better. He had never felt this proud of anyone. Hell, he had never been this proud of himself. Yet here he was, about to pop with pride over a baby that had finally figured out how a pacifier worked. Reality was truly stranger than fiction sometimes. Izuku's pacifier fell out of his mouth. Oops, Hisashi murmured softly. He stood up, his back stiff from sitting so long, and walked to the bathroom to wash his hands before reaching into the incubator carefully. Let's fix that, shall we? Hisashi said, as he picked up the pacifier and oh so gently pushed it back into Izuku's mouth. Izuku sucked it right back in, returning to suckling as if he had never dropped it. Hisashi beamed. Izuku shifted slightly, a hand reaching out as he stretched his arm. Hisashi hesitated. He had already spoken to Izuku, and he didn't want to overwhelm him, but Hisashi put his finger in Izuku's little hand. Immediately, Izuku grabbed back, his tiny fist tight against his finger. Hisashi blinked in surprise. His grip was much stronger than it had been the first time. The last time he had barely felt the curl of Izuku's fingers over his. This time Izuku was truly gripping it, hard. Hisashi's grin grew wider. The feeling in his chest grew impossibly larger. Good job, Izuku, he mouthed. Good job. Hisashi read the text over again. I'm sorry I wasn't able to text you sooner, but Mitsuki and Katsuki are still doing okay. They should be good to come home in a few days. I won't be able to stop by for a bit, but try to get some sleep, okay? I know you were worried, but everything's going to be fine. He had been worried. His reaction to Mitsuki's saying her contractions had started may have been a bit much, but he didn't think anyone could really blame him. His wife had died in childbirth. He didn't want to see that happen to her best friend. Luckily, it hadn't. It was a relief, truly. Hisashi was glad Mitsuki and her baby were doing well, but there was some other feeling growing under his breastbone. It was one he was familiar with, although it was usually in the context of quirks. He was jealous. Jealous of the fact that Mitsuki's labor had gone smoothly, that her baby had been to term, while Inko's had gone So very, very wrong. He had dreamed of that happy moment, welcoming Izuku to the world with Inko. That didn't happen. He got a nightmare instead. It wasn't fair. Hizashi sighed, watching the screen go black from inactivity. He knew the world wasn't fair, and crying that it wasn't was something he should have gotten over centuries ago. He wanted Inko's best friend to be happy and healthy. He wanted the Bakugos to be by his side in case something went wrong, and there was nothing he could do about his situation. It was as simple as that, and he just had to deal with it. He shoved his jealousy to the side and hoped they would send more pictures of Katsuki soon. It would probably be as close as he would be able to get to their son for a while. There was a knock at the door. "Yes," Hizashi called, putting his phone in his pocket and looking up. Shinso, a nurse with permanent eye bags and unruly black hair, peeked his head in. "Nezu-san is coming to visit soon. Just thought I'd let you know." Hizashi resisted the urge to ask if the rat could delay. He knew the answer would be no. "Thank you for telling me," Hizashi said tiredly. Shinso nodded, and the door closed again. Hizashi rubbed his temples. How many days had he gone without sleep now? Was he at 5 days again, or was it 6? He couldn't remember. He was almost tempted to go to bed, forcing Nezu to talk with him at a later date. However, that would leave Izuku in the room with no protection from Nezu, and that simply wouldn't do. He would just have to hope that Nezu's mind games were on easy mode today, because that was probably all he could handle. He needed to find a way to get some actual sleep. If he was going to be in negotiations over his retirement with heroes, he needed to be at the top of his game, not one stressful event away from a break with reality. Although his brother would probably say he had that a long time ago. The second knock at the door came far too quickly. Hizashi let out a heavy sigh, scrubbed his hands through his hair, and stood up to grab Nezu a chair again. "Come in," Hizashi said as he dragged the chair closer to his own. He fell back into his own hospital-issue recliner as the door opened and Nezu entered. Hizashi clasped his hands and leaned over, glaring over his hands at Nezu. Nezu's nose twitched in the air, beady black eyes inscrutable. It was hard to tell where he was looking or what he was thinking. Hizashi resisted the urge to twitch under the weight of his eyes. There was a reason he had avoided the principal of UA. As smart as Hizashi knew he was, he feared Nezu was smarter. It was stupid to pick up battle he was not certain he could win. It was just a pity he'd been thrown into it anyway. "It seems your son is with us today," Nezu said cheerfully, folding his paws behind his back. "May I see him?" Hizashi stiffened. He did not like this. This felt like a test. He did not want to let the hero see his son. He was too vulnerable, too delicate. But he was supposed to believe they had entered good-faith negotiations, and if he showed signs of not trusting the heroes, then it was not outside the range of possibility that they might see him as untrustworthy as well. He needed this to work if he wanted to keep Izuku by his side. He needed this to work. Stiffly, Hizashi nodded. Nezu would need something to stand on to see Izuku, but Hizashi made no move to get something for him. If he was that invested in seeing his son, Nezu could do it himself. Nezu tilted his head to the side, black eyes burning a hole into his body. "Thank you," Nezu said with a smile. "I'll be right back." The Chimera turned around and walked out the door. Hizashi let out a slow breath and tried to force his body to relax. Good faith negotiations. That meant they couldn't hurt Izuku, and if they did, he would raze them to the ground. Nezu returned too soon, a small stool dragging on the floor behind him. He set it up next to Izuku's incubator and hopped on top of it smoothly. Hizashi watched him anxiously. Izuku had been showing signs of waking up earlier and was now somewhat active. His eyes were open and he was shifting in place a lot. He did not move nearly as much as a full-term baby did, and his movements were far more jerky and uncontrolled, but he was still moving a lot more than he had before. Hizashi thought it was a good sign. "Hello," Nezu said simply, tilting his head. Nezu's head was placed right in the center of Izuku's field of vision. His son stared at Nezu with unfocused eyes. "I must be very curious to you. I do not have a human face, do I?" Nezu said, watching his son. Izuku blinked, his tongue pushing out of his mouth. He wanted his pacifier. Hizashi would give it to him, but his hands had just been touching his phone, which was dirty, and giving Izuku his pacifier would require washing his hands, which would require leaving Nezu alone with Izuku, so that would have to wait, unfortunately. Izuku's gaze shifted away, and he turned his head, looking out into the room past both of them. "Or perhaps I am not very interesting to you at all, precisely because I do not have a human face," Nezu chuckled. "That is quite all right. You will have time to be curious later." He stepped down, walked back to his chair, and jumped up on it smoothly. He folded his paws in his lap. There was a smile on his face, but it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. "What do you want?" Hisashi asked. Nezu chittered a laugh. "Skipping the niceties." "I welcomed you in and got you a chair," Hisashi pointed out. "But yes, you and I both know that the reason you are here is not to visit my son. You wanted negotiations, so that's what you will get." Nezu tilted his head, his smile widening. Smiling like that, Hisashi could see sharp teeth glinting behind the chimera's rat-like incisors. His black eyes shone coldly. Nezu may look like a rat, may joke that he is part rat, but there was something undeniably predatory about him. Objectively, it was far more likely Nezu was a chimera of some kind, almost like the Nomu, but far more successful. He had long been curious about Nezu's origins, but knew better than to attract his attention by looking into it. It was unknown if Nezu's quirk was natural or the result of the experiments that had been done on him. Still, it was uncomfortable to be stared at like he was a particularly interesting prey animal. It brought back memories he had long tried to forget. Humans were known to be cruel when they decided another person was not truly human. Hisashi resisted the urge to move in front of Izuku protectively. "Very well," Nezu said. "Let's begin, then." Hisashi nodded. "The first order of business is to schedule a regular time for more in-depth negotiations. As you may be able to predict, I will not be the only individual negotiating with you," Nezu said. "Who else will be there?" Hisashi asked. "All Might, for one." Hisashi barely swallowed a groan, almost imperceptibly. Nezu's smile widened. Of course he would be there. He'd asked that brainless oaf to be a sponsor. Of course he would be there. Why had he done that again? Surely there must have been a better hero to pick, like Endeavor, or Yoroi Musha, or even Wash, who he was pretty sure was only so high-ranked because children liked his merchandise. "Sir Naitai and some representatives from the HBSC will be there. I believe your social worker Megumi Ito will be in attendance as well," Nezu said. "Fine. Izuku has no procedures coming up, and I have nothing on my schedule. Just let me know ahead of time, when and where to be," Hisashi said. Nezu nodded amicably. "Second order of business is a paternity test," Nezu said. Hisashi blinked slowly. "Are you implying that my wife was unfaithful?" Hisashi said, his voice rising. "No," Nezu said, interrupting him. Hisashi's eyes narrowed, and he let out a slow, controlled breath and waited for the rat to continue. "We simply need to ensure that Izuku is truly yours," Nezu explained simply. "Do you really think I would be here like this if Izuku was not my child?" Hisashi asked scathingly. "Of course not," Nezu chirped cheerfully. "However, other members on our team need a little more assurance." Hisashi would bet money it was All Might. "Fine. Yes, I will comply," Hisashi said tightly. It was stupid, but fine. He needed this to work. "But," Hisashi said, "you will have to get your blood sample from Izuku when he is getting another draw for other, more important procedures. I will not allow my son to be poked with needles more than is strictly necessary." Nezu nodded, and Hisashi sat back reluctantly. "Wonderful," Nezu said, clapping his paws together. "Now, the last order of business. We would like you to orchestrate the peaceful arrest of your associate, Dr. Kuidai Garaki." That escalated quickly. Hisashi refused to acknowledge the chill that went down his back at the thought of betraying one of his most trusted associates. "I have already told you where Garaki works," Hisashi pointed out. "He will not be expecting anyone. Just get him there." Nezu tilted his head, his smile and gaze unwavering. "True. However, we want to see that you are willing to work with us to gather and arrest some of your more hidden accomplices, so such a lax approach will not do, I'm afraid." Hisashi let out another slow breath. This was it. He had given out information before, given away his resources, his projects, but the act of giving up Garaki meant that it was truly over. He was giving up his empire for his son. Hisashi glanced at Izuku out of the corner of his eye. Izuku had turned to look at him. He blinked slowly, his eyes unfocused, his pink tongue peeping out of his mouth as he listened to them speak. His limbs tremored, but the doctors had reassured him time and time again that it was normal for an infant of Izuku's age to move like that. He wasn't cold. His nervous system was just immature. He was growing so well, but Hisashi wasn't satisfied. Hisashi wanted to keep seeing him grow. He wanted to help Izuku into clothes for the first time. He wanted to kiss his little nose. He wanted to hold his baby. He wanted to see his first smile, hear his first words, help him take his first steps. He wanted to help him with homework, set up his birthday parties, and watch him play with friends. He knew Izuku's rough start would follow him for the rest of his life, but that didn't matter. Whatever happened, he wanted to be there for him. He wanted to be there for it all. He couldn't do that if he was still a villain. It was his empire, or his son. I can call Garaki and tell him to meet at a location of your choosing. Your forces can capture him there, Hizashi said. Happy? Nezu's grin widened. Quite. Hizashi sighed and pulled out his phone. All right, listeners, this concludes Day 14 of All For You. Day 15 will be next. I hope you all are still enjoying. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to everything so far, and as always, thank you so much for listening.